let's just build the walking track straight up. So you're to thank for the 500 odd jelly bean steps that get you up there.
A rather brutal section. Yeah, so yes, it's exactly the story.
Hi everyone and welcome to episode 9 of the Go Word Trail Running Podcast. It's Mark here. I'm joined by my co-hosts Phil.
G'day.
And Paddy.
Hello.
And also special guest Graham,
Thank you for having me along.
who we'll introduce further in a second. Before we begin, I would just like to acknowledge the Djapurrung and the Jardwajali as the traditional custodians of the Gary Word area and just recognise their long-standing custodianship and the way they've looked after this pretty phenomenal landscape for millennia. Also, just like to recognise you're listening to our local band Trapezoid here in the backing music. Great local band, a lot of fun. They'll get you up and having a bit of a boogie, so encourage anyone to come check them out. Now, our special guest today does know a fair bit about the park. We're very lucky to have him on, and I'd just like to welcome Graham Parks. Welcome, Graham.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, good to be along today.
Thanks, Graham. So you're actually the head ranger or ranger in charge here for a number of years. Did you want to just talk a bit about the time you've spent here in this landscape?
Yes, we arrived here in 1994. We'd been working at various locations around the state. We were actually at a little town called Buchan, where we were there for about 8 years, and terrific years and great country. And then this job as ranger in charge here in the Grampians came up, and I was just delighted to take it. Since then, well, it's been 30 years now, but we've been retired now for a few years, so still living here in Halls Gap.
That's fantastic.
I haven't seen you on a Friday morning trail run recently, Graham. Have you ever tried any running?
I had a neighbour years ago when we were in East Gippsland who used to be a great runner, and I made the mistake one morning of jogging out the front gate as he jogged out. And I don't think I've quite actually, I didn't meet his standards, and I haven't really done a great deal since, but I love walking. Yeah. Walking is my great love.
And you would have done plenty of that when you were a ranger around here, I'd imagine.
We've done fantastic walks here and in East Gippsland, in the Alpine country, in that hinterland country. We've had some terrific experiences over the years. And the Grampians is truly one of the great places for walking. It is a sensational walking destination.
Well, you've got, and I know you mentioned you're retired, but you've got a few community hats that you do to help out here, which is fantastic. A small community, but I know one of them is with the walking track support crew. So really there to support the trail network and help.
Oh, it's a terrific group. We do general maintenance works on walking tracks. We organise working bee weekends, and we try to attract hiking clubs from all over Victoria to come and help us. But the type of work we do is trimming back vegetation, cleaning out the drains, and some minor maintenance to things like stonework, stone steps and so on. On occasions we do bigger jobs. We've just funded ourselves and installed a new walkway up at Heatherley Quarry, and
nice.
that was a great project.
Beautiful wildflowers up that way too for those coming in that time of year.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
If you want one of the best and easiest places to go see wildflowers, go to Heatherley Quarry.
Also, I was running up the Barocca Trail the other day and noticed the first 1.5 kilometres had suddenly just become so much more runnable than it was previously, and I think your group had something to do with that.
Yes, that track is a sensational track, but over the years, if you can just picture this, vegetation, rocks, soil gradually come down over the track. So what was a nice bench shape on the side of the mountain suddenly becomes more of a slope, and then the walkers tend to walk out to the edge of it, and they're walking down further down the slope, and then the track is not really all that usable again. So what we've done there, and we want to do the entire track with volunteers over the next year or so, is with mattocks and shovels and picks and so on, carved out that material that's come down over the track, and it's called re-benching. So we re-benched the track.
Fantastic.
One of the things we're focusing on this podcast, Graham, is sort of a walkthrough. It's a 12-part series focused on the Grampians Peaks Trail, and today we're episode 9. We'll do a deeper dive into that in a minute, but you've actually got a fair bit of background information that the three co-hosts here aren't privy to about the trail. Did you want to describe a bit of concept to build through your time here as sort of the head ranger?
Yes, there's a long history with the Grampians Peaks Trail, and when we arrived here, people were talking about the need for a great walk in the Grampians. There was this concept developing of a walk that probably went from Hall's Gap through to Dunkeld, and the government of the day in 1997 actually committed some funds. The dilemma was we didn't actually have a firm concept of exactly what the trail was, where it should go, and the whys too. Why did we actually want to do this? So it really stayed as a bit of a developing plan for a number of years. And then, of course, we had the 2006 Grampians fire, a massive fire, and it essentially closed most of the Grampians National Park. We ended up with facilities that were absolutely scorched and unrecognisable, a walking track network that would not operate again because a lot of the infrastructure is gone, bridges, walkways and so on. So it was back to square one. We had to virtually replan how we were going to restore the park. And we went through step by step. And yeah, we can replace that toilet, we can replace that bridge, we can do those elements of the recovery. But we had a really clever planning officer that joined our team for a while. And he just quietly said to me, he said, "Graham, these are good plans. But at the end of restoring the park, what is the one thing that you'd actually like to see as a longer term legacy or something that visitors would really appreciate?" So, well, I responded there, a long distance walk would be great. But again, we didn't really have that clear idea exactly what it was. But working with this planning officer, we started to take a concept from something that was going to link different tracks from point A to point B to something that was a new purpose-built experience. And the idea of a track going from Paul's Gap to Dunkeld firmed up as a walk that would follow the Sarah Range between the two locations. The more we looked at that, it was clear that the Sarah Range is really hard country to walk. It's beautiful, it's up and down, but because it's so beautiful, we said, well, don't we actually want to look at it rather than walk it? So that's why we settled on the Mount William Range, and with the most extraordinary views of the Sarah Range. And then the concept extended right through to Mount Zero. So we're looking at a track that would go A to Z, abrupt to Mount Zero. Oh. And then we started to look at the different ways that you walk, and it became really clear that it was best to walk from Z to A, from zero to abrupt.
It's amazing because we always hear people talking about it when they're on this section that we're talking about today or the prior section, say anything from the plateau all the way down to Yarram Gap Road and beyond. Everybody talks about that view that you have looking west to the Sarah Range because it's incredible. Like, it's such a silhouette that you get there.
It's extraordinary. And the other part of that is when you think of that original idea of going along the top of the mountain range, it had challenge, but it lacked diversity. Whereas the route that was finally taken has that great mix of peaks, that high country stuff across the plateau and Mount William, heathlands, swamplands, terrific variety of different environments, vegetation and so on. So that worked really well for us. And that became one of the driving features or driving influences in our trail alignment was diversity.
Now, there was a bit of discussion amongst us prior to this episode, Graham, about the fact that the trail does land exactly on what's called a miler or 100 miles, which is pretty important in trail running. So we were questioning whether there were any kickbacks from
Big Ultra, I think, might have got to Graham.
Well, number one, I can't even think in terms of miles. I don't know what it is, but I can only think in terms of kilometres. But it was designed as a walking track, and that's been one of the rather fascinating evolutions of the trail. We never envisaged that someone would be running that whole trail in pretty well over a day. But having worked out on the tracks with our group and seeing the groups that come through, you get that amazing diversity of users from the dedicated groups that are doing the entire trail. And that amazes me because I never really thought that people would be doing it from end to end in reasonable numbers, but they do. To see the trail runners come through, to see day walkers come through. So we see a lot of long distance tracks around Australia and around the world, but I don't know if any track system has allowed for so many different uses along the way. And the other element that we designed into it in the first place was recognising the need for lots of entering points and hopping off points. Because with a 100 mile or a 160k odd track, you don't want everyone starting at one end at the start of a long weekend
and not able to pull out.
And so that's why, quite deliberately, we've got so many different points where people can enter the trail system and hop off the trail system. So really the whole track system is available for everybody, particularly going into really busy times.
The vision that you've had, it's really truly amazing to think about such a long trail and think, you know what, we're going to do this, and it doesn't exist at that point in anyone's mind. How do you feel now that it's up and running? You must be feeling a bit proud and a bit stoked that it came about.
I reckon it's a fantastic outcome and pretty astonishing, the support that we got along the way, particularly from local governments. We had the 4 local governments really, really keen. Grampians Tourism was right behind it. The CEO at the time put an enormous amount of work into it. State government and federal government. It would be a really good example of a big project that has had such widespread and universal support. Mind you, that took a bit of building along the way. You know, when I think back to 2006 and that spark of an idea, and the following time, the number of times that we went out and did presentations and we talked to people and started to get momentum for the whole project. But once it had that momentum, people really could see the enormous benefits for a whole variety of reasons, for conservation, for protecting the park, for the visitor, and for the local economy. There's a whole suite of terrific outcomes there.
It was still quite something because 2006, it opened,
2021.
2021. It's still quite some time between, a 15-year gap between the seed sprouting, the seed from 1997, and then turning into a reality.
Well, I think it's a great example of when you embark on a big project, you've got to have long timelines in mind and you've got to be pretty dedicated to actually getting an outcome, but also realistic at what it really involves. You see in different communities, people have ideas, but to take those ideas to a big and terrific result does take a lot of time. But one of the defining moments for us was around 2008, where we were able to get a little bit of seed funding for a business case for it. Something that could demonstrate that it was actually viable. It was a really good feasibility study. And it was a simple one about building a track. There was no great ideals of putting lodges on mountains or anything like that. It was about building a track, but why? Why were we doing it? And how that could be measured, and that the investment would be for a really good purpose and outcome.
This is such an amazing landscape and pretty privileged to be able to work in it for 30 odd years. Have you got any sort of favourite parts of the landscape itself or little hidden gems that people might be interested in hearing about?
Just between us.
Yeah. We won't tell anyone.
I reckon the great thing for us is how different parts of it are. But I'd have to say that one of my favourite sections is the busiest section of the lot, the Wonderland Range and the Pinnacle. Our grandkids come to stay every summer. What do we want to do? We all want to go to the Pinnacle. It's an exceptional walk. It's an extraordinary walk, and love doing it every time. I love that section, the new section up to the waterfalls at the base of Gar. That originally was going to follow the old walking track up the front of Gar. It was not a good track. It was a very difficult track Sorry for the Mount difficult connotation there, but it was a really trying track to walk. So it was a great outcome to get that new alignment through the waterfalls there and up on top of the range.
One of the absolute highlights for a lot of people is just following those waterfalls up. And I actually was lucky enough to run it earlier today. And we had some rain the past few days, so they were just teeming with water, and it was incredible.
The thing about that section is, we have this idea of this long distance walk being for these hardy walkers, but it's just terrific for locals as well. And it's like our regular trips up to the pinnacle.
I like how you talk about the diversity and how that was part of the design of the trail from day one. You said, you wanted to make it diverse and you wanted to make sure that you got to get a piece of every part of the landscape. When a lot of the trail runners come out here and race it or run it, especially racing, the words they use to describe the trail is usually beautiful and brutal.
And majestic.
And and sometimes majestic.
And relentless.
Relentless is the other one. And to my mind, I think that diversity is sort of what creates all of those adjectives. When you said diversity, all those words sort of came, coming to mind as to how everyone describes it.
And one of the other great features of the whole trail is that ability to get up mountains and down mountains with very little environmental damage, because as you would have seen on the steeper sections, it's generally all stone. Beautiful stonework and really high quality stonework. So that was built into our original thinking as well. Tracks generally through the bush are not that hard to build. Going up and going down, that's where there's some big challenges in design, but also in expense as well. So that's where we put a huge amount of effort. So you go up Mount Abrupt today and you just see the most hardy stonework there that'll be there for decades, probably longer.
Was there anyone trying to tighten the screws on you at any point, saying, look, these stones are a bit,
Have you thought about treated pine?
Yeah, that sort of thing. Yeah.
I've got a long experience with treated pine as a park. I spent 43 years in park management, and there was always, treated pine is the most sustainable. Wow. Until it actually burns. And in 2006, prior to 2006, there was this beautiful treated pine walkway over the plateau. And when we went up to the plateau after the major fire, there was this beautiful line of 100mm galvanised nails going across the plateau, and that was about all that was left. So give me stone and steel.
Well, that legacy of the 2006 recovery efforts has really played out into the trail now too, because you mentioned the plateau and there's no treated pine up there now. Post 2006, those sort of mesh panels, the oxidised steel mesh panels, were put in after that event, and that's actually, that design feature is carried through into the trail and the new build.
Yeah, and it's got such a lovely look and texture about it. We did our first raised, you call it black steel because it rusts, it's not galvanised or anything like that, up on the plateau, and that was a major exercise post 2006. We had to fly everything up there with some pretty big choppers. That's another story again, trying to get that material up there through cloud and all sorts of weather. But it allows for the vegetation. I remember getting an idea many years earlier. I don't know if you know the Kosciuszko, the section of trail that goes from Krakenbach to the base of Kosciuszko. Beautiful raised walkway there. The thing that really impressed me was the vegetation growing up through it. And today, when you go over the plateau, that's exactly what you see. It's just the raised walkway hardly exists because of the lovely vegetation going through it.
The other one I just want to point to while we're talking 2006 and legacy, because I think this one is important into the design and alignment of this trail. Rarely do you get a switchback on the Peaks Trail. There might be one or two, but they don't exist. I don't know how relevant this story is, but I remember talking to a former parks employee who was employed post the 2006 fire doing some recovery works. And we've talked a bit about the Pinnacle, and in previous episodes we've talked about the Pinnacle loop you can do from town here. So there's the one where you go up from the caravan park, we call it up the front of the Pinnacle, but I remember there used to be a few switchbacks prior to 2006, but everyone would do the little shortcut. And then the way I heard it was that you, on your instruction to the crew, you're like, well, if they're going to just keep going straight up, let's just build the walking track straight up. So you're to thank for the 500 odd jelly bean steps that get you up the
rather brutal section. Yes, it's exactly the story. Because I love younger people, but what do? They run straight down the hill wherever they can. Switchbacks don't mean anything to a young school group. And the same applied on the section of trail going from Wonderland Car Park to the Pinnacle.
Yeah, okay.
We had a long section there of switchbacks that never worked because people just went straight through them. So when you do that section today, you'll see hundreds and hundreds of stone steps that were all hand split on site there, and they are as durable today as when they went in nearly 20 years ago. And they survived the 2011 floods magnificently. So that's another good test for durability. So switchbacks, if you can get rid of them, just get rid of them. Probably the lesson to learn is about design. Just getting the design right, getting the grade right. That section up the Mackey's Peak, it might have ended up a bit steep, but anyway, it works.
It's not easy to run up. That's for sure.
It is pretty incredible that this, particularly the Grampians Peaks Trail, but all of the trails, they have been designed for walkers, yet trail running, perhaps it wasn't so popular back when it was designed, and it's become the most incredible trail for trail running. There's just nothing so suited to technical trail running as the trails around us here. It's incredible.
It also probably demonstrates the history of the users too, because if you look back 100 years ago, people would enjoy almost like that discovery type experience going through the Wonderland. They'd love to look at the rock features that all had names on them because it was more of a mystery experience rather than a natural experience. You look back, 30, 40 years ago, the big users would have been scout groups and youth groups and doing those hikes and so on. You look today and we're seeing the vast number of people are not hugely experienced bush people. They're not people that were born in the bush and so on. Generally, they're urban-based people wanting those greater and better natural experiences. And that's what we've got to think about. And we also now need to think about a lot of people who have recently arrived in this country starting to want to get out and experience the bush too. So that needs to go into our design work as well.
Just before we get on to Sector 9, as you know, I used to work here for Partner. You're working here. I think I started when you were still here.
So you did have an overlap?
Yeah, I don't think it was it was probably 6 months or something.
Was Mark a good employee or was he a bit...
Exceptional.
Yeah, I was obviously out too much for him to realise.
Kept disappearing for a run.
No, but one of the things that's interesting as a park ranger, I've heard some different terms for park rangers over the years, but now I'm not a park ranger anymore. One of the tasks I don't miss too much is the facilities run, but that usually is done from a vehicle. But on these remote walks, you've got the challenge of waste management in really remote locations. And I wasn't there, but I've heard a story of the hiker camp up on the top of the plateau after the 2006 fires and the cleanup. What systems in place now to manage waste, or how is that incorporated into the trail?
That wasn't a pretty sight.
Your face says it all, Graham.
I think when you think protective clothing, I don't know if they really had anything to handle that particular job. But when you looked at our walking track experiences pre the Grampians Peaks Trail, they were largely not well connected. People had to find their own way to join tracks up, and they weren't well supported with waste management. So you do the numbers. If there was 20, 30,000 overnight stays out on walking tracks in the park, that conjures up a pretty horrible image when there's not great waste management there. So it was a real driver for us. So the concept involved quality waste management from every campsite, and if it means flying in devices to replace other ones that fly out with the human waste, well, that's what it entailed. There's a cost to it, but it beats any other option, particularly today. Like when you think of the amount of quality water that needs to come out of the Grampians for communities, it's the only approach.
I mean, we've all seen a row of portaloos before a marathon start line. It's not a pretty sight, and I can only imagine at the top, if you put that at the top of a mountain, it presents some challenges.
Mind you, the original toilet on top of the plateau didn't have a roof or a structure. It simply had a handrail. So it was a magnificent
Would have been a great view.
Absolutely beautiful.
A loo with a view. Yeah.
Great.
Can you imagine frosty morning though?
We're about to get into section 9, and I do know it's you can drive to this hiking camp in this location, so it doesn't quite have those same sort of logistical challenges either. But Paddy, do you have some stats on Sector 9?
Yeah, so Section 9, it actually starts at Yarram Gap Road, and yeah, so which is on the Mount William range, and it actually crosses over the main Grampians Road and ends at the Griffin Fire Line, which is the start of the Serra range for this section of the GPT. 12 k's long. It's got 440 metres of elevation gain and 490 metres of elevation loss. I'd be keen to hear from you guys from a running perspective. My thoughts, it's quite a runnable section.
Yeah, looking at people who've run it in the past, and Graham, do you have Strava? Are you on Strava? No, okay.
We'll sign you up before we leave. Yes.
This is probably one of the only segments where some of the top times on the Strava leaderboard are actually looking like they've done some running.
Almost like road running.
Almost road running
times.
pace. For example, Brodie Nankervis, he won it, got the crown in 2003 during the race.
2023.
2023.
He would have done well in getting it in 2003.
Yeah, it's,
He's aged well.
yeah. So, in 2023, during the race, he did it in 58 minutes and 2 seconds, averaging 4:51 per kilometre. So, we're finally talking about some average paces that are similar to road running, which says a bit about the stage.
When I've run this section a few times, I often do a little loop here, but we can talk about that in a sec. But I find that the technical bits on this trail are on the uphill when you're heading from north to south.
Yeah.
So the techie bits are kind of when you're going slow anyway, and then on the downhills, it's actually very flowy and less technical, and you can really get some good pace there.
Some grassy spots and that sort of stuff as well. You can sort of tick the legs over. Now, Mark, I also see that you've got a number 2 on this leaderboard. That was on the same day, so you couldn't really get Brodie on that day.
Oh, it was a...
You let him have it.
I did. I was like, look, I feel a bit sorry for him. He can have it today. So
yeah. It was actually very good though. Like it was a 1 hour and 8 minutes, so only 10 minutes slower than Brodie, which is not too bad.
Well, I do reckon this section, I still think it's the easiest of the 12 sort of sections. I know when we were doing our initial analysis before we did the relay, that team, and trying to allocate the legs, we kind of allocated that as the most easy, but I still believe that probably holds true in terms of if you looked at the 12, what's the most runnable, probably easiest on your legs.
Sorry, where we talk about possibly the least, or one of the least technical, and maybe one of the not as difficult as some of the other stages, it does make up for it in the views, as you mentioned, Paddy, looking across to the Serra range. And
well, you've got those views to the Serra range, and then I just love when you start heading downhill, then you've got the what do you call the camp that's down there in the grassy area.
Mount Christabel.
Yeah, it's very different to the rest of the landscape that you've seen so far.
And I'm not doing it at a running pace, but the thing that really gets me excited about that country is just that expectation looking south. You sort of think, wow, look, Mount Abrupt, look at that country down there, and it sort of draws you in that direction. It's very, very spectacular.
When you get to, so you got about 4 peaks, 4 or 5 probably, that you kind of go up and down before you have the descent into the hiking camp and Mount Christabel area. But there's a bit of history behind that area too, isn't there, Graham?
Oh yes, the Lynch family there farmed for many years, and a long time ago. They would have been really remote. Like their existence there would have been without any good road going from Dunkeld past their property like there is today. That was only built in the 70s. So where they are would have been a very difficult site to get in and out of in the early days. It's a terrific spot today when you visit through there, but it's a vastly different experience from the rest of the park. So you're going through a rocky bushland, then you come out, like you say, to that lovely open grassy clearing there, and take your mind back 100 years or more when another family was eking out an existence there.
When would that have become incorporated into the national park? Was that in the initial?
So there's a big story there. A huge story. Not long after I arrived, there was a proposal from a school camp, a notable school camp, to actually construct a school camp in there. The difficulty they had, that there was no formal, legal or weather access in there. So from a planning perspective, local government said, well, you really can't actually do it. So the owner at the time was devastated about it, but we kept talking. And I just quietly suggested that one day he might consider it being incorporated back into the national park. And it wasn't long after he said, that seems like a really good suggestion.
Wow.
And he loved the site. He had great plans for it himself, but they were never going to be realised because of those planning considerations. And today, now we've got that asset that was virtually surrounded by national park anyway, included in the national park. So he'd actually commenced building a rather magnificent structure there, but was never able to complete it. So which Parks Victoria is now removed.
In this conversation, I've learned it was the Lynch family that lived there, which makes sense because I often loop that section just down to that clearing there, and you cross Lynch's track shortly after that.
Yes.
And then I head north back up Lynch's track to complete a loop if you park at Yarram Gap Road, which is a really, really nice loop because you get these beautiful views and you get this bit of technical trail, and then the return is quite flat. There's a few rocky sections where they've had to put things down for fire truck access and that sort of thing, but it's quite a nice loop returning back up to your car.
So it's good, and then so you get the vert either, depending on your preference, you could take the flat way out and come back with the vert, or vice versa type thing up over the peaks on the way back.
Yeah, yep.
Because then once you cross Lynch's Crossing, you actually get to the Wannon River and part of a beautiful heathland known as the Wannon Fan. Did you want to just touch on the Wannon Fan?
Well, it would have been, many years ago, a much bigger flow than what it is today. Today, a lot of that water is actually fed into the water system, so some of it is taken off to... some of it actually comes north over the range, whereas it used to go south. It's done through a system of weirs and pipes and comes back into the stall system.
But the Wannon Fan, like that itself, is a pretty nice bit of heathland too.
It's an extraordinary environment.
Yeah, environment and diversity through that system, yeah.
Bandicoots, potteroo, heath mouse. It's an extraordinary environment, and fortunately it hasn't had that intense fire history that other parts of the park have had, although just recently the fires have touched on that area there. But when it would have flowed back probably 100 years ago, it would have fed water into that Wannon River system down past Dunkeld right through to Cavendish and beyond. And a lot of that now goes through farmland and doesn't flow like it used to. Within the park and adjoining the park, there's some great stuff happening in terms of revegetating areas that were disturbed and making that a much richer habitat than it was just recently.
That's fantastic. I know the Walker Swamp, which I assume feeds from some of that, which I know some of the private land, like some of the work Nature Glenelg Trust's doing down there, borders the park, and just that sort of private-public conservation efforts.
Fantastic project. And that's the way that country is going to be restored, from the park outwards.
You kind of run through, we call the Wannon Fan, you got a couple 100 metres over there.
So sorry, can I clarify? So the Wannon Fan is when you're on the raised path.
Well, that's kind of across the Wannon River, but that whole heathland, basically through to the road almost, is sort of the Wannon Fan type thing, or until you start climbing again.
And right down to virtually east of Mount Abrupt.
Yeah,
all that country up to Mount Christabel would be pretty well the Wannon Fan, because it spreads out, it closes back in again. But if you get around where the Griffin track is and you look at that system there, if you walk through there today, there's a beautiful system of connected little wetlands, little high bits, little low bits, and you can picture that when the water was really flowing, how it would have flowed from that wetland to wetland to wetland. So that's probably why it's called a fan, that it's broadened out and then it sort of closes back in again once it starts to get around towards Dunkeld.
Sure.
I know when you're running it, you got this really nice sort of flowy descent down into Christabel, the open area, and then you're kind of running through the Wannon Fan, and then you cross over the road. So you've got to the end of the Mount William range. You've spent 60 odd K on that from when you cross over at Burra Huts there, and then you cross the main road. And this is really deceptive from a running perspective. Like in my head, I remember doing it in that 2023 event, and I was thinking, oh, sweet, it's this flat now through to Griffin Fire Line, but it's actually probably got about a 50 metre elevation. So it's only gradual, like it's probably only a 2 or 3% at most. But when you're not expecting it and you're thinking it's a flat finish, it's just enough that, and it goes for a couple of K as well.
We thought you were just taking a long time. We were waiting in Griffin, and it's like, oh, what's Mark up to?
Yeah. Brody's been here for 10 minutes. One thing you touched on, Graham, which I really like, is that when you're coming down into that grassy section, you mentioned that you can see all the way down to Sturgeon and Abrupt. So at this time, if you're running the entire distance, you're sort of sitting about, 120, 130 kilometres into the race, which is an unfortunate time to put a runnable segment in. I don't think that was by design, was it?
No. No, we're only looking at a walking experience, but I'll diverge a bit that country has such a special feel about it. And you might know of the great painter Eugene Bongerard. He did a magnificent painting looking south from Yarram Gap Road, taking all that in. And I recommend to any runner, just track down that painting and you'll get a view of what he saw. And it's not much different to what people see today.
Oh, wow.
That's amazing, yeah.
I reckon we got the little thumbnail for the podcast episode there. I think the challenge is on.
Let's just tell our listeners you're looking at that thumbnail if you're having a look at this episode now. There is a certain spot, there's a couple of images that sit in my mind from this sector. One is when you're on the ridge and you can look across at the Sarah Range and spectacular. Also looking back up north at some of the peaks that are on the north side of Yarram Gap Road. They kind of have this volcano shape from that aspect, and they're quite spectacular as well.
Absolutely, and I think that's a great indicator too of the amazing variety of geology in that part of the world, because a lot of it is typical Grampians sandstone, but you go into that Mafeking country where you get into the granite country and it's a different shape altogether. So it's a good way to read the landscape just by having an understanding of the geology along the way.
And then there's obviously then also the image of when you're coming down into the clearing at Christabel there. Just after you sort of run along that clearing and you have to go over a bit of a ridge that's, again, it sort of feels a bit like pasture at times. But there's just this amazing feeling is just getting over this ridge and you're not sure what's over this hill, and then you're just confronted with another beautiful scene that just appears as you're getting over it.
I've taken a lot of people into Mount Christabel, and they usually leave. You sort of say, we're going to this old farm that was surrounded by National Park, and they usually leave the place going, wow, that was absolutely fantastic. And I do know a number of people there who have spent annual visits there just to enjoy the end of day. Like the end of day at Mount Christabel with the setting sun there and a few mates and a bit of food and refreshment. Fantastic sight.
It sounds like your visitors are slightly different to a lot of mine, Graham. Like, I don't know if you have the same user feedback, but based on a lot of the user feedback that I have is like, so why is it a Grampians Peaks Trail? Like, why couldn't it be a Grampians Flats Trail?
Oh, the name. There's another story altogether. That's a big story.
Might be nice to go into the name, actually, but let's come back because I wouldn't mind just reflecting on you stopping the miler, like the last year's event too, and the experiences.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so my miler experience finished at Yarram Gap Road.
At the start of this segment.
Yeah, the start of this segment. And I was like, obviously a bit frustrated at the time, but completely understand. But like, I was really looking forward to this section because it's felt like I was through the really technical bit and I was looking forward to doing something that was a little bit easier. But yeah, unfortunately, while I was waiting for my noodles, that's when the race got called. And I'm thinking, if I'd known it was coming, I would have just bypassed the noodles and just
got out there.
Just gone for it. But yeah, I was looking forward to this section. This section and from Griffin Fireline through Cassidy's Gap. Quite looking forward to that too. Then I knew there was Vert coming after that.
Yeah.
It is interesting because I know doing the stage race last year, you were sitting down and I turned up to that aid station at Yarram Gap Road, and so you've just run from Mount William Car Park over. So you've done about 30 kilometres, but that day 3 is 40. So this is the last segment. And I saw you and you were like, oh, the event's been cancelled. And I thought you were just having me on a little bit at the time. And then you're like, no, it has. I'm like, you can't be saying that with a smile on your face like this. But it was obviously for the best.
Yeah.
And everything like that. But it was interesting. Having done both sections a couple of times, probably in that 3 months lead up to the event as well, I actually found myself, I backed off quite a bit during that 2024 event on the previous section, knowing that this section was really runnable. So I'm like, oh, if I blow up and I'm forced to sort of walk, people are going to be able to make up a lot of time on me because it's runnable. I want to save myself to make sure I have something left. But then I didn't get to run it anyway, so...
Because, Paddy, you were saying that at that stage you were feeling pretty good. You know, in previous episodes you sort of touched on that you sort of found your 4th, 5th, 6th wind.
Yeah.
And when it was called, you were a bit disappointed.
Yeah, and I had a bit of a longer break at Jimmy Creek Road, so I might have stopped there for about 20 minutes and changed my shoes and washed my feet, all that sort of stuff. And then, through that technical section, the bouldery section from Jimmy Creek Road to Yarram Gap Road, I sort of picked up the pace a bit, and I was actually about 20 minutes faster than my target time for that. I was thinking, oh wow, now I can just keep that momentum going after I eat my noodles.
You definitely looked good. You looked better than most of the stage runners when I came across.
Well, I think I'd also been there.
It was the noodles. Takes years off your life.
I'd sat there for a fair while before you got there that day, so that might have helped. You weren't looking at my feet. That would have been a different story if you were.
Well, that's about the point where you come back on the loop you were discussing earlier, Paddy, isn't it?
Yeah, nearly 17k loop, at least, depending on where you park.
That's a good running loop, though. If you're coming to stay in the area, you can drop your car off at the road and get in that loop, and you're having a good time.
Also, if you don't want to leave your car at the road, you can also park at the Wannon Crossing campground and then just run a couple of 100 metres up Yarram Gap Road and hit the trail there. Based on my friend's advice, it should be the Grampians Flats Trail and just go around all the peaks instead of actually going over the top.
That's a good idea.
Very different to what runners want, very different to what trail runners want. Not saying anything about road runners, Phil. But yeah,
but it's easier if you go around it.
And the Grampians Peaks Trail, GPT, it rolls off everyone's tongue now. How did the name come about, Graham?
Well, originally, if you looked at the early concept, everyone's mind kept going to great. It had to be something great, like the Great Grampians Walking Track or the...
GGWT.
And every time it was mentioned, a number of us would sort of wince and but no... It just didn't seem appropriate to put the great in our fantastic park, because it's a great park anyway. Garrywood is an exceptional place and you shouldn't have to really mark it with a great there. So I was really thinking that it needed to have some more cultural connection to it, and I would have liked that. A lot of people in the organisation said, people identify so strongly with the word Grampians. So the Grampians Peaks Trail came about, and it's not a bad name. It would be nice to have a cultural connection there somewhere along the line. I'm not too sure how you do it though.
It's nice, some of the naming of the sites along the track. So you've got the hiker camps and things like that.
Every hiker camp. That was a great outcome. Every hiker camp has a name of cultural significance and generally identified to the site and the locality. Some of them are just well known in everyday language, like Yarram. Others, we had to do a fair bit of research and consultation to get that naming right. But I am really pleased that the camps and a lot of the features are, when you think of GAR, most people talk about GAR now. Terrific.
Yep.
And that's the way it should be. That should be the priority. So if we start to look further and further down the track, that would be my wish, that more and more the trail would get that stronger cultural identity and linking to it.
We touched on right at the start that unintentionally you'd built this trail that was 100 miles long, which is the trail running community and the ultra running community owe you a debt of gratitude for that one. But the GPT sits nicely next to a bunch of other famous worldwide trails. It's not going to be too long until it's held up in the standards of one of the world's greatest trails. It's seriously fantastic.
I think the great part, like Graham said, doesn't need to be said.
Yeah, if you have to say something, it's great. If you have to try and convince people that it's great.
Maybe it's a bit like the big koala, which if anybody hasn't seen that, that's nearby.
It's not that big.
I guess you can't leave out the big, otherwise it'd just be the koala.
Oh, yeah.
I want to know why Majestic didn't make it into the title.
Oh, yeah.
Majestic. Yeah.
This has been a fantastic episode, so massive thanks to Graham for imparting your wisdom. So
Very welcome.
Thanks a lot, Graham. That was great.
I could listen to you talk about this trail for a lot longer. Yeah.
No worries. No, it's been a pleasure.
really appreciate it. Just encourage everyone to give us a follow on Gary Word Trail Running on Insta or Facebook and look up the regular Friday morning run. We'll be back next episode, be episode 10, which will be taking us through to Griffin to Cassidy Gap Road.
It was nice to have you back for this episode, Mark.
Oh, yeah. Thanks.